You do it anyways.
Okay, so Joseph is in Egypt. He's in prison after having been sold by his brothers, after his first master there, slave master Potiphar, his wife had lied. And now Joseph in prison is going to come into contact with some men and interpret their dreams, and ultimately he's going to come into contact then with the Pharaoh, and he's going to be able to interpret his dreams. Dalen?
What's his name? I forgot his name, Auditors or whatever.
Potiphar?
Potiphar. Yeah. When his wife lied, didn't Joseph say that he wasn't going to go with her because he knew he couldn't?
I imagine that Joseph, I suppose, again,
Would he stand his ground?
Potiphar's wife was lying, and I suppose when she told her husband the lie, he probably called in Joseph, and Joseph probably said, "I didn't do that." And probably even gave some evidence. Well, here's what really happened, and I suppose again, Potiphar's in the situation. He's got two things, and even if he believes Joseph instead of his wife, which one can he really act on in his position? He probably has to go with his wife rather than a slave, huh? Even if it's a trustworthy slave that he really cares about and has respect for, and that's probably what's that?
His wife is his wife.
Because his wife is his wife, yeah, and the slave doesn't really have a whole lot of standing, and so that's probably why instead of having him killed, which would have been a punishment that could have been carried out, probably why he had him put in jail and even in a place now where he gets elevated to be able to take care of the other prisoners. Lena.
Okay, I would still trust, yeah, it's a slave, but if, they have a better story than I screamed and he left his cloak, I'd still go with the slave.
Not if you're in his position.
Did you hear a scream?
No.
I think it would have been pretty tough for Potiphar to take
Decide.
What if he
to
just
decide
told him to
and
go
to take the word of Joseph over his wife. That would have.
What if he told him just that he had to leave?
Whatever, Joseph ends up in prison, and now we're going to see what happens.
Oh, no.
So let's start there.
I feel like prisoners these days can escape those prisons. So
Can I read?
Let's read Genesis.
Your best friend.
First of all, 39, 20 to 23.
Got it.
Kingston, you want to read the end of chapter 39, starting with verse 20. All the way back to Genesis. Yep. First book of the Bible.
Oh, he's sitting in it. He's like, oh yeah.
Oh, I always put a bookmark or something.
Now where do I want to go?
Yep, all the way back to Genesis.
39.
Chapter 39,
Oh, I'm almost there.
verse 20.
Wait, no, I'm not in Genesis. Oh, that makes more sense. Okay, now I'm in Genesis. So 29.
39, 20. Hey, got it, Kingston?
Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Sometimes.
So, pause there.
Wait.
What?
So, but Joseph was another prisoner, so wouldn't the prisoners just not respect him and not do what he said?
Well, except that the warden had put him in charge.
And they know the warden.
And so they know that the warden had put him in charge. And
So they kind of.
I suppose, too, why did it happen that Joseph got put there? Part of it is probably because the other prisoners respected him, huh? Just as the warden was, they respected him, and so everything went smoothly with Joseph in charge. If there were problems, the warden wouldn't have done that. It wasn't that Joseph had the keys that they could go and get out, but within the prison, a lot of the day-to-day things that had to take place, to provide for the prisoners and that, and make sure everything, make sure there weren't any riots or that. Joseph was in charge of that. What was that?
What do you think the prisoners were there for? Like,
Probably a variety of things. It was it says the Pharaoh's prisoners were kept there, so we're going to see a couple of them come there. We're going to see them in a bit. So there may have been a wide variety of crimes, and in some cases, maybe the king just didn't like them and so decided to stick him in prison too. That happened too. Sometimes you can get the king angry with you, and you're one of his servants, and he might put you in prison, at least for time.
Oof.
Okay, so describe Joseph's life in prison. Describe his life, Emma. What was it like there for
It
him?
was good.
In many ways, good. Huh? God blessed him and put him in charge of everything. Emma,
Remember it though.
we'll write that down then.
You figure it out. Oh, was it like normal for the warden to put prisoners in charge?
Probably not to that extent, but probably they would have had certain jobs, and there would have been maybe a little bit of supervision that they would have given. So when it came to cleaning and meals and things of that nature, the prisoners probably would have been in charge of a certain amount of those sort of things, with some oversight from the guards and the warden. So
Do you think any prisoners would have escaped at there?
I don't know. Okay, let's read on chapter 40. Elena, pick up with verse 1 of chapter 40.
Sometime later, the cupbearer, and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own.
Let's pause there. Good question, Ethan?
Wasn't the captain of the guard Potiphar?
Possible. He was, again, here, Potiphar, captain of the guard, so he's in charge of, he's an official.
Well,
he may not have been the only captain of the guard, so it may not have been the same man, but similar position. These were soldiers there. But
Don't say that.
you have the chief cupbearer and the chief baker being thrown into prison here. And those were important positions. What do you suppose each did for the king? Baker, that's maybe easy. What do you suppose the baker did?
Big. Can I tell you what the
Big things
cupbearer
for the king. What did the cupbearer do?
He had tasted the Pharaoh's cup before he had it to know if it was poisonous or not.
Yeah, so
That'd be a risky job.
it would be to some extent, especially if the people were a lot of times would try to kill some of these rulers. Kings didn't put that away, so pay attention. And if they tried to poison them, then try to get that into their food. So suppose you open a bottle of wine and the first sip out of there, the cupbearer would take a drink of that, and if he lived and he didn't keel over dead, well, it's fine. Then the king's going to drink it.
After a while, it poisoned them, or if it was in the cup and not the wine.
Well, if you're watching him pour it out, I suppose if it was in the.
But what if it was after a while, how foodborne illness, how sometimes it can take up to 4 to 8 hours for it to affect?
I suppose they took some of that into account, but that was the cupbearer's chief job. He was to make sure that the king's food wasn't poisoned, so that the king wouldn't be killed. Nail it.
What if, he was drinking it, he's like, oh yeah, this is fine, knowing that there's actually poison in there and making it like that.
Well, if you would
Well, they would
then
wait and see. there would be a little time in there before they'd serve the
What if he
king.
drank it and he like left it in his mouth?
So they like serve it before,
And then like turned around and spit it out.
the banquet or like feast.
So the cupbearer in some ways was a bodyguard, wasn't he? He was a bodyguard for the king. Only his specific job was to, in a sense, protect the food and make sure that that
So
that
did
he,
he get to eat the food too?
so he would sample the food anyway.
You'd get free food.
Free
You get
samples.
paid for eating food.
Yeah, but if it was poison,
But if it was poison, then yeah, that'd be the end of it. And it doesn't tell us what they had done. It seems that, again,
They disagreed on
they
it.
disagreed with the king. The king, Pharaoh, got upset with them, and so he threw them into prison. Doesn't necessarily sound like there was a whole lot that they had done that was necessarily wrong, but somewhere the king was upset with them.
What's on their heads?
What?
It looks like they have like bald caps.
Yeah, I don't know what that's. I suppose something like that.
They dyed their hair
Hey,
white.
Emma, read on.
Well, is the like a cupbearer a good okay job to have, because technically you're that means you're okay with dying. So
I suppose it would have been a position of honor and prestige. Think of that. If you're in charge of making sure the king isn't getting
That's like being a
poisoned,
veteran, basically.
how much is that king going to trust you?
Soldiers.
A lot, isn't it? This is somebody that the king really. So
If they lie,
if you want to talk to the king and give him advice, the king's going to listen to you, isn't he? So you're going to serve also in many ways as kind of an advisor to the king. So it was a prestigious position. No doubt they were paid well, but there was a risk.
they better
no,
be
what I'm
paid
saying
good.
is does God think it's okay? Because is it good?
Well,
Like,
is it okay to be a bodyguard for the president?
Yes.
And if somebody shoots, what do you have to do?
You have to cover
You have to cover him up and put your body in place of his. That's kind of what the cupbearers did. Only instead of dealing with bullets or bombs or things of that nature, they were dealing especially with the food and drink. So that was their position. Emma, read on, verse 6. So these two men, the cupbearer and the baker, they each have a dream. Now we're going to hear about those dreams. So verse 6.
When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed. On its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup. I put the cup in his hand." "What this means," Joseph said to him, "the 3 branches are the 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hands, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison, for I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in this dungeon."
Okay, let's pause there. So, after the cupbearer and baker are put into prison, they each have dreams the same night, and they're upset because they don't know what these dreams mean. But they think there's some deeper meaning behind them. And what did Joseph's response to them indicate about the ability to interpret their dreams?
That it was God.
That it was God, yeah. God could provide the interpretation of their dreams, huh? If it's a dream that God has given with a special meaning, God can also provide that meaning, huh? And that's going to be the case here. So first of all, the cupbearer tells his dream. What's his dream?
That he squeezed the
Three vines.
Okay, so you got this grape branch, you got 3 branches coming off this grapevine.
Into grapes and then he squeezed them
It
into
blossoms
the
and there's grapes, and he squeezes it into the cup and he gives the cup to Pharaoh. Okay, so I'm going to sum that up. So from a grapevine, 3 branches, he picks grapes and makes a drink for Pharaoh. And what does that mean?
He
What's
squeezes the
going-
grapes and makes a drink
Yeah.
for Pharaoh.
And God allows Joseph to give an interpretation for that dream. And what's the interpretation? What does the cupbearer's dream mean?
The 3 branches are 3 days, and within the 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you.
So what's going to happen to the cupbearer?
He's gonna get out of
That's
prison.
like twins.
He's going to be reinstated. He's going to get his job back, huh?
The cupbearer and the baker look the same.
So good news for him, huh?
Days he would get his
You can get your job back. You're only going to be here for 3 more days, huh? You're not going to be here very long.
Well, I was not going to be there for 3 more days, but
No. And what does Joseph ask that the cupbearer do then when he gets reinstated and he goes back into Pharaoh's house? And what does he ask him to do?
Tell him about his interpretation.
Tell him about me, huh? Remember me. Say a kind word for me. Say, I met this guy in prison there who probably doesn't deserve to be there, and he helped me out and he interpreted my dreams and to try and get me out, huh? Because I was sold into slavery and hadn't done anything wrong and don't even deserve to be here and have been mistreated. Put in a good word for me. Dalen.
So, like, when they're in the prison, do they, like, give them food and water?
Yep.
Do they just come down there and throw food in there?
I
there's
suppose
slots in the doors.
it would probably depend upon, again, what kind of prison this is. This is the king's prison, so they're probably treated fairly well. In some prisons, maybe it wouldn't have been that great, and maybe it would have been. You just kind of
Just so leftovers.
throw whatever in there, and they have to fend for themselves among the prisoners. But probably here it was a little more orderly. And again, you see that with Joseph being put in charge.
He's
That-
allowed to,
Just
like,
salad and
that-
chicken wings.
That, and but they would have been taken care of here. Okay, let's read on. So, Dalen, verse 16.
When the chef baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation,
Yep.
he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of bread goods for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Until 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Now, the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all of his
Officials.
officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief
cupbearer
to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him.
So now the baker is going to tell Ethan.
Wouldn't that be kind of disturbing? You ask for an interpretation of a dream and he says you're going to get impaled by a pole.
Yeah, I think it probably would be. And yeah, you know,
Isn't Chef and Grease spelled the same way?
no, chef doesn't have an I in it.
It's like a ghost.
So why did the baker share his dream with Joseph? Joseph gives the good interpretation, to the cupbearer. You're going to be restored.
I think she's gonna go to
And he thinks, well, he's maybe going to get his job back too. So he hoped for a favorable interpretation too, didn't he? He didn't get it, did he? Just the opposite.
Well, that's better than just having to stay in prison. I mean, it was like a life sentence.
What was the baker's dream?
There were 3 baskets of bread on his
He
head,
was going to get a deal.
and birds ate it.
And the birds were eating out of those baskets. So he had 3 baskets of baked goods, and the birds came and ate out of them. And Joseph, again, God allowed Joseph to interpret that, and what was the interpretation? 3 days he was going to be killed, huh?
Well, like the dream, you can see how like they connect.
So he dies?
So he dies, yep. He's
So
executed.
This is not good then.
No.
And the birds start eating them.
Why would they eat his flesh?
Birds pick at any like food.
Well, I think of crows and birds like that.
And
Crows
worms
and ravens and
fleas.
things like that are
Dead bees and stuff.
scavengers. What do you see? You have roadkill along as you're driving along, and you see birds down
Eagles
there picking
are
at
those
them.
too.
Eagles will do that to some extent, yeah.
Well, they usually take like
So,
alive kind of.
so some of the birds, the scavenger birds, will eat that dead flesh. So if they impale him on some pole of some kind and stick his body out there, and I suppose they would do that a lot of times with those political executions, because then everybody could see. Think of Jesus being crucified too.
It's like hanging someone.
Where do they do that? They did that so that people would see, if you break the law and you do these crimes, here's what happens to you. And everybody passing by would see, I don't think I want that to happen to me. I might not do that.
Hanging someone?
What's that?
Isn't that like hanging someone?
Hanging would be a similar thing. I suppose, like, you think of the hangings that took place in our country, usually they would take them down right away after they were dead and bury them. But in some cases in the ancient world, they would leave those bodies out there for a long time.
Really?
Days or
Somebody
weeks.
did it.
And then, again, the wild animals, and especially the birds, would come and pick at the
That's
flesh.
like a
and that.
meat locker for animals.
Yeah, but they stab him to the
Okay, so Joseph's interpretation was that in 3
He would
days
die.
the baker would be killed.
3 days he would be killed. In 3 days.
How accurate were those interpretations? 100% right. Yep. Exactly right. It turned out just as Joseph
They were
said.
exactly right. They were exactly right.
Ooh, can we do this one for homework? Or we interpret Pharaoh's
We're
dream?
gonna go through that.
What time do we normally eat at?
6:30.
Oh, guess what? Okay,
What special request did Joseph make to the cupbearer?
Towards him to Pharaoh.
Yeah, remember me, huh? Put in a good word. Put in a good word. Ask the cupbearer to talk to Pharaoh to get him out of prison. And what did the cupbearer do?
You forgot all about
You
it.
forgot
all
and
about it.
never told Pharaoh.
Never said anything.
How would you forget
Wait, I'm
about
not
him? He
finished.
seriously like saved your skin.
Yeah, you'd think that,
You
but
didn't really save him though, because that was gonna happen anyway.
Yeah, but you told him in advance, so he didn't just like try to kill himself or something.
yeah, you'd think he would remember Joseph and say something, wouldn't you?
To get
But yeah,
him out of prison.
I suppose maybe it shows who the cupbearer was really concerned about, just himself. Maybe the kind of individual he was, but whatever.
He was selfish.
No, he forgot him.
There's one L in selfish.
No. You want to sell the fish.
Shellfish.
Now we're going to see, even though the cupbearer forgot him, later on he's going to be remembered because Pharaoh is going to need someone to interpret his dreams. And the cupbearer is going to remember, hey, I knew a guy who interpreted my dreams, and
This is a
they came
long
exactly true, and he's going to tell Pharaoh about him. And God's going to use all of this to work not only for Joseph's good, but he's going to use this for the good of all the people in the region, including the rest of Joseph's family still living in the promised land there in Canaan. So let's start reading. We won't get all the way through this section before we stop for supper, but let's start reading. Ethan, chapter 41, start there at verse 1.
We got you.
When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile. When out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up all the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream.
Keep going.
In the morning, his mind was troubled. So he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him.
Okay, let's pause there. So now Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has a dream. What was Pharaoh's dream, first of all, about the cows?
They were flat, naked,
and ugly.
First of all, you have 7
Good cow.
fat cows, huh?
yeah.
They've been eaten well and they're fat and healthy. And then what happens?
Find
They got eaten by other ones.
So then 7 other cows come up.
What
and-
sounds like?
Because cows
Old,
eat
like
grass.
the dads
They eat
and
grass,
babies
but
came up
it's a
with
dream,
the
huh?
dads.
It's a dream. Quiet. Listen.
the dad's either.
So you've got 7 fat, healthy cows that have obviously been eating well, and now you have 7 skinny cows that are obviously undernourished, haven't had any good grass to graze. And what do those 7 skinny cows do?
Pac-Man.
Eat the other cow.
They eat the other cows. And what happens? Do they get fat then?
No.
No, they're still skinny, huh? So you've got 7 ugly, unhealthy cows, ate 7 good cows, but the ugly ones are still unhealthy.
Ugly cows ate good cow.
And again, I suppose with these dreams, they were probably rather vivid to Pharaoh, so that he's thinking, they must mean something. This isn't just a normal dream that you might have, most nights.
It's
This
just like a repeating thing.
This is something a little bit more. And so he's bothered by that, huh? I wanted to find out what this means, because this is something out of the ordinary.
Yeah, well, it had like the same thing
It'd be
twice.
kind of weird.
And now he has another dream that's very similar
Here's another one that's just the same.
about the grain. First of all, you've got what? 7 healthy, good heads of grain, and then you've got the 7 thin heads, and the unhealthy ones eat up the healthy ones.
It would be even worse if it was like a cow that was like big, and then the smaller ones came up, and then they got healthy, and then it just kept looping.
But we're going to see what they mean. We're going to get an interpretation of that.
Is it like a repeating?
Of course, what problem did Pharaoh have with these dreams? Not only was he troubled by them, again, these were apparently dreams that were out of the ordinary, so Pharaoh knew this must be some meaning to that. What was the problem?
He didn't know what they were about.
He didn't know what they were about. And so he calls together all his advisors, all his wise men, all the smart people in the country, and how many of them can come up with an interpretation?
Absolutely.
No, they can't come up with anything. So no one can tell them what they mean.
What do you think they'd like pretend to, though?
No, because they didn't want to like have that happen, and then
He
it
finds out
wouldn't
that
happen,
they're
and then Pharaoh would get mad at them.
Yeah, I suppose if they tried to give some interpretation and it didn't fit and it didn't happen, then they'd probably be executed. So there may be some risk there. We see that later on at the time of Daniel. Daniel's able to interpret some dreams for a king too, and the other wise men try to interpret it, and they get in trouble when they don't give a proper interpretation of it. In fact, then in one case, the king says, "I'm not going to tell you the dream. I want you to tell me what the dream is and the interpretation."
Yeah.
And of course, how can I give you an interpretation if you don't tell me what the dream is? In that case, Daniel is able to do that because God reveals that to him. But here, God's going to reveal to Joseph what this means. Let's read on then. Kingston, pick up at verse 9. Now the chief cupbearer is going to remember something. So verse 9 of chapter 41.
So the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me, the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, the servant of the captain of guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. The things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and then the other man was impaled." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh. "But God will give me Pharaoh to answer the But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires."
Okay, let's pause there. So now, the chief cupbearer remembers, Remembers Joseph. And it seems like it had been quite a while, Doesn't it? That this wasn't just a couple days after the cupbearer was released, but, as he says, Pharaoh was once angry. That was a long way back, and you remember when you got angry with me and you threw me in prison for a while back in the day? So maybe it was, months, maybe it was even years.
It's a 2
Let's say 2 years? Okay, 2 years. So, long time,
When
2 years.
full years had passed.
Well, at the beginning, when 2 full years. So, man, not just a couple days. He's remembering a couple years. So, allowed the cupbearer to do what for his king and for Joseph? Bring them together, huh?
Yeah.
So that Joseph could interpret them.
Wait, okay.
So think if you're Joseph, you'd maybe be a little upset with that cupbearer, wouldn't you? 2 years ago I interpreted your dream, and now you're finally remembering me?
But Joseph just said to remember me when you get out. So like,
I mean, he remembered him
yeah.
when he got out.
And don't you think he probably had it in mind a little quicker than 2 years? Yeah.
Only a little bit.
Yeah. After the cupbearer brought the information to the Pharaoh, what did he do? What did Pharaoh do? What did he do with Joseph?
He sent for
Sent for Joseph. Well, we got to go get this guy, huh? We got to get him out of prison, bring him here so he can interpret my dreams. So he had Joseph brought out of prison to him. Because they gave Joseph a chance to, get cleaned up and probably put some fresh clothes on, and now so that he can appear the proper way before the king, before the Pharaoh. And to whom did Joseph again give credit for the dream interpretation?
God. He
God.
said, I can't, but
He said, I can't do it, but God can do it, huh?
Yep.